Hi, and welcome to Class 4 of syn101. I'm John Montgomery, serving again as the voice of Victor Wolanski for Voyage Through Synthise. Today we're going to use several different shots to illustrate a couple principles. We're going to be talking about some shots with just some pans, stuff on the tripod, one with a pan and a zoom. And then after this we'll start getting the more complex things in future classes as well. But this will provide us with a really good opportunity to take a look at some problems that come up when you're tracking, because of course anyone can hit the big green auto button and have something. It's what to do when things go wrong and what to do to make your track even better than it was to begin with. That's where the real skill of doing tracking does. And I think this will start to introduce some good concepts for us. So let's go ahead and open up our first sequence. It's going to be a shot of Michigan Avenue, shot on the HVX 200 in Chicago. And you can see we've got the normal setup as we've been through this before, H720p footage. But in this case, what we're going to do is a little bit different that hasn't been done in previous classes, and that's a bit of image processing. We're going to add a little bit of blur to the shot just because there is a little bit of noise. It's a little bit grainy, noisy in this HVX 100 footage. And when you track a shot with noise, it can really cause problems for the tracker. Things like film grain as well can cause problems as well if you have a very large image with film grain. So just going to put in a value of 1 for the blur at this point in time, and what that's going to do is just actually start out with getting a better tracker than we would ordinarily without setting the blur. You can also kind of take a higher res version if you had something, say a 2K file, and size it in half, and that can help get rid of some of the apparent noise as well. So go ahead and load up the footage and take a look at it. And you can see the shot. It's fairly basic in nature, but there are some problems that we need to deal with. We'll go ahead and take this and play at the normal speed, or at least 12 frames per second normal speed. But if you take a look at the shot, you can see some objects that are moving and so forth. Like the cars, you might want to mask those off, spend the time doing it. You take a look, maybe the guys walking on the street, maybe even the trees moving. But doing that masking can actually take a considerable amount of effort to go through whatever this is 190 plus frames of footage. But there are some really good tools for doing after track that you can use, or even after solve that you can use to clean things up, and that's what we're going to take a look at now. So in this case, don't do a mask. So again, this is fairly straightforward, but it's got some things that we can take a look at that can be problematic when you're doing composite and such. You can see, there are these windows and such have a lot of similar patterns. It's a repeating pattern of windows, and it might jump from one corner to another corner or something like that, and can really create problems when you're tracking and create bad tracking points as well. Stuff like cars as well might, the person walking down the street, you could track them. So we're going to have to kind of work around that and figure out things of working around it. There's also, if we take a look at the shot, some lens distortion, and you're generally always going to have some lens distortion or a bit of lens distortion on a shot, just the nature of optical lenses. And what we're going to do is we're going to fix that by getting rid of the lens distortion. That's actually a good thing to do. You can do it before tracking, and then you can do your comps and then apply the lens distortion back after that. Later on in the class, we'll dive into this a little bit more deeply in detail, but this is going to be a first look of it. So we'll go to the lens panel, and what we're going to do is add lines. And the idea behind this is adding these lines that you feel, in looking at the scene, should actually be straight, like the end of the building. And we're going to say it's not oriented at this point in time. Same thing here with this corner of the building, and you can actually see that there's a little bit of distortion there. This one up here on this building. And again, we're just helping us define and look at areas that we feel should be straight. So you just pick some various points, and luckily this building scene gives us a lot of great opportunities for that. And along here you can see, especially as it gets close to the edge, you can see that there's certainly some distortion. So take a look at that. And you can see that, yourself, when you start working the footage, that it's not a straight line. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and adjust the lens distortion here. with these values. And what's happening here is we're not actually doing anything with the image at this point. We're actually moving the lines on the image to make them line up with the footage in the shot, or the lines in the shot. And so they get closer to matching these lines. You can see that the edge of the building now more closely matches the line there. So you can now take that and just leave it like this, and when you do the camera solve, it will take that into account and so forth. But what we're going to do is we're just going to actually apply and undistort the footage and then do the tracking. So if you hit P, you get the image preparation setup window. And if you go to the lens tab, what you're going to do is we're going to get the solver distort. And by clicking that, what's going to say, okay, do you want to clear the distortion from the camera's lens panel to avoid double distortion? In other words, you want to clear that stuff that we're seeing there? And we say, yeah. So we'll do that. It clears the data from there. We still got it here, though, in this lens window. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And it's going to clear the cache. And then it's actually going to undistort the actual footage. And now you can see that the lines are actually straight. Now the lines in the shot actually don't line up with the lines we drew exactly, but again, they are straight. If you take a look at them, there's much less curvature. So we'll go ahead and delete these lines. We don't need them anymore. And let's go ahead and save our work in progress in case we want to change it for future. It's always good to keep a work in progress going in case software crashes, you do something that you don't want it to do. Next step, we'll go ahead and do the solve. And again, or tracking, excuse me. We could go ahead and hit auto as we've talked about in the past. What we're going to do though first is we're going to go ahead and put on a tripod, which is going to help the tracking algorithms. And so now we'll go ahead and run the auto tracker. And it's going to go through and track the scene, and we'll start seeing some of the problems that we need to deal with in the scene. So we'll take a look at the scene, and you can see that we actually have quite a few errors and a couple problems with the trackers. You can see them jumping around and moving around on the scene. If you look there on the building, it's just shifting up and down. Because again, as we talked about earlier, it's getting confused a bit by the geometry in the scene. This is a good way. Just select the tracker. You can see it actually jumping around. That wasn't a bunch of different trackers. It's actually the same point, but jumping around because the image data and the pixels are kind of confusing the tracker. You got the person over on the left that we've tracked erroneously, and we want to be tracking moving objects. And then we have a bunch of really little bit of motion on all the trackers because of the noise in the scene. And so even though that we did a blur, it would have been far worse had we not done the blur. But again, that little movement you don't have to worry too much about in the solve. But the next thing we're going to be is go ahead and hit solve. And if we take a look at it, we're going to have actually a really huge error value in our track. 11.3 is our pixel error value, which is really unacceptable value for us to have in a scene. The track is just not going to work well at all. And again, you can see things are just kind of shifting around when it should actually be locked. You've got the person moving, we've got the the trees and the leaves on the branches moving, and that's causing the program to think the camera is actually moving. So what we've done in the past is we've gone through and manually removed a lot of those objects and spend the time to just go find them and delete them and get rid of them and take care of them. But as a starting point, we can actually do a much faster job of that with some built-in tools within SynthEyes that makes it really a lot easier for us to change and adjust so many things. So we'll go ahead and under Track, select Clean Up Trackers. And you can see actually in this dialog box, we actually have a lot of really good information actually about our scene. It's asking us what we want to delete. Do we want to delete far-ish trackers, short-lived trackers, high-error trackers? What we want to do is go ahead and delete bad frames. And it's showing that we have 215 of them with a pixel error value of about 15, which is really bad. And same thing with our high error trackers. We've got a value of 56 there that we're going to get rid of it. Now you can adjust those and change them, change the error threshold, I should say. But again, this is just really useful to take a look at the scene. But we're just going to go ahead and fix that for now. So all you need to do is click Fix. And look at all the trackers that actually went away in our scene. You know, a vast majority of the problematic trackers that we were looking at with our eyes are now actually gone. The people are gone, a lot of the trees, a lot of the cars, even the trackers from the building that were moving around have been moved. So we're going to go ahead and hit go. And we click OK, you can actually see that the error pixel value is less than 1. It's 0.625. So we're at a much better starting point, much better place to begin with our camera, and it's going to look a lot better. And we didn't spend all this time going through manually deleting points or even masking. And so we've got our field of view set and our focal length set. And now we want to go ahead and orient the camera and add an object to see how everything's working within the scene. Now, the interesting thing is actually in this scene, you don't actually need to orient the shot. Just the way the scene works, because it's a camera on a tripod and it's fixed, and the camera itself is not even moving. Whatever you put in the scene anywhere is going to kind of stay in place, and it's going to not really matter where you do it. But it actually is a lot clearer if you end up positioning things and getting things aligned correctly within the scene. I mean, for instance, we'll just go ahead here and draw a box within the scene. To just, again, positioning it really in an arbitrary place. It doesn't really matter. Actually move it here in the camera where that needs to be. And so just draw it and floating up in the middle of the air. And if we take a look at this, we'll go ahead and take a look and scroll back through the timeline once we get this drawn. You can see that it's really just going to stay in place. You know, we've got this thing moving. It's, you know, locked to the camera. It's sitting there. It's really, you know, for all intents and purposes, would work fine with us. But the thing about it is generally when you're working in a 3D compositing environment, it's really helpful to have things aligned the correct way so that when you move things, it's moving the way you expect. And it's also good, say you were passing this shot off to someone else, because you're not always going to be doing the compositing, you might be doing the tracking. It just makes sense that what you'd want to do is provide something that was aligned and oriented in a camera in a meaningful way for someone. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just kind of adjust this and make it big here. So we have something a little more larger for us to adjust and orient the camera with, making it look more, I guess, almost like a building. We're going to do our old standard trick now of manual orientation in this scene by selecting the camera and then going ahead and locking the camera. Take whole and then start positioning things around in our various views. And again, as we did before, you're going to want to kind of rotate about the center point of the camera, and you can use each view to get things oriented the way you want. You know, top view is a good way of setting up the overall positioning of the camera. Go here to the side, or front, excuse me. Side view is actually quite useful as well for doing that. So go ahead and rotate this up. You can see that we should actually kind of be looking up at all those points in the scene. Get that a little better. And again, remember our trick of kind of getting the things near or close to the ground aligned correctly. Now, actually, one thing that would actually make things easier for us here as we're adjusting this object is getting the camera aligned. So let's go ahead and switch over here to our perspective view. Probably actually should have done that the first thing when you're working. And then go ahead and lock to the current camera. And now we've got this nice ground plane for us that we've seen in the past, and that allows us to look at vanishing point lines and so forth in our scene and get things lined up correctly. We took a kind of, it really helps to have the road and all the buildings in the scenes. I mean, in this case, you want the camera to be close to the ground because we know it was just above the ground because it's on a tripod. And so that's starting to look a little better, and again, much easier with those perspective lines for us. So go ahead and rotate around the scene. Kind of flatten it out a bit, and then this is going to make the big trick for it to look good. And so now we've got that camera much closer to what we want and much closer to reality. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the scene, you know, doesn't have to be, in this kind of case, 100% correct. Maybe if you're crunched on a job and you don't have the time to do it, maybe this will get you to the point where you can export it to your compositing package and do your fix or something like that. But no, go ahead and we'll take this object here and move it on over to kind of where the buildings, we think the buildings might be. and go ahead and move that up. And then take a look at the scene and kind of scroll back through it and see if it's close enough to what we want. And again, it's matching at least much better than what we had before. And again, at a point that's much better for someone else to take over the scene in a meaningful way. So now let's sort of look kind of at a pan here, a fairly simple shot or whatever. But one way to confirm that what we've got is a good track is to once again take a look back at our graph editor again and see how our data stacks up in our camera paths. And what you want to do is again take a look at the solved path. And if we open that up, you can see the pan, tilt, and roll values here are what we've got focus on. And if you go ahead and you can click the magnifying glass to get them all effectively framed together. And if you deselect those, so you've got one selected, you can see the pan is looking really good and smooth. And we'll go ahead and look at the tilt. That's looking good as well. And then the roll here. Now don't be alarmed by this jagginess of the roll. What's happening here is the value change here that's being shown on the graph is actually really minor. We're zoomed way in on the graph. Zoomed really far in here in the viewing of the graph. So it looks like the difference between frames is really quite exaggerated, but in fact it's actually a pretty decent track. Now let's take a look at another shot that we're sending out with the footage this week. This is going to be a shot that has both a pan or tilt and a zoom in the shot. So it introduces a little bit more complexity into the scene and things that we can do. So go ahead and import the sequence with our default settings. Now we're just going to go ahead and do a track of it. But before we do that, we're just going to go ahead and run the auto tracker. And if you take a look at the scene, you can see there's a lot of movement. There's some fabric and stuff, and then especially on the gentleman working on the car, he's moving around and so forth, and there are a lot of points that are actually tracked to him, and that's obviously not something that we want in the scene. But once again, instead of going through and deleting all these points like you might have done in weeks 1 through 3, we're going to go ahead and, in this case, actually select on tripod and a zoom lens. And then we're going to go ahead and click the solve and check out what happens. We'll click OK. Now if we look, we've got an error in our pixels of just around 2 at this point. So it's not an outrageous value like we had in the other scene, but 2 is still something that's not going to be great. It looks decent, but not perfect. So let's go ahead and make that better using the cleanup trackers. And again, by default, the bad frames aren't selected. We'll go ahead and select those. And when you click show, you can actually go through and modify the threshold of the error. And so that's percentage versus pixels. So we can see that we're actually going to go ahead and now we've got 12,000 selected. With the threshold is 65, but we'll go ahead and bring it back down and get that much to more meaningful value. And basically, as you play with this, you'll kind of learn. But again, the idea is to do a little bit at a time, maybe, and you can see that you've got several selected on the gentleman, and now it's going away. So what you want to do is just adjust the threshold value to the points that you can see which points are actually being deleted. So we'll go ahead and say fix. And so you can see that we've really gotten a good number of trackers removed from the guy working on his car. And now we'll go ahead and select Refine Tripod, because we want to refine the tripod move, not the normal move, and we'll click Go. And you can take a look at our error value is now all the way down to 0.2, which is actually quite an acceptable value for having within the scene. You've got the zoom working correctly. The first part of the shot with the tilt is working correctly as well, and the zoom, everything looks really nicely locked in and so forth. Let's go ahead now and change to our perspective view and lock to the current cam. And we'll go ahead and mock up really very roughly our ground plane in the scene. We're not going to get too carried away with it. camera, lock, and then we're going to go ahead and select whole, and then go ahead and select rotate, and rotate around. That looks actually pretty good, but we'll take this top one, rotate it around. And again, you can kind of use the edge of the grass there, or the edge of the alley or driveway or whatever it is here. But again, it's helpful to have some vanishing lines or some parallel lines within the scene to work with. And then we end up getting something, if we take a look at that, we're actually looking pretty good at this point. Now, to talk about that point about the object positioning in the scene that we did kind of on the last scene and where it's placed, let's go ahead and just place a little box here on the scene. And you can take a look at where we're positioning here in the top, you know, where the tracking points are and where we're putting it. We're effectively kind of arbitrarily, you know, putting it within the scene. And we'll go ahead and rotate it around so we get we can see more sides of the object and see how locked and so forth we are. And now when we go through the scene, you can see that it actually looks and appears to be locked to the camera move that we've got going on. And again, we can just go ahead and, you know, it's, as I said, it doesn't really matter per se when you're doing it. We'll go ahead and move it back there, move it down a little bit, and go ahead and scroll. It still looks as though it's locked within the scene. Again, you might want to position this object if you've got a lot of objects that you're putting and you're, you know, doing moves in between the 3D positions as a place of setting up realistically. Don't forget also to go and check out the graph editor and make sure everything looks kind of good to you. And this will also give us a chance to kind of show you a cool trick that we can do to help things out with our camera solve. So we'll go ahead and leave solved on and check the solved path and take a look at the pan, tilt, roll, and even the field of view. We'll bring this up in full frame as well. And we've got those framed correctly. Again, to zoom in on one, you can take a look at our pan. Now this looks really quite bad, but again, like the previous version, don't worry about this. We're just zoomed really far into the graph, so you know the change is kind of exaggerated here based upon the scales that we're seeing in the scene. We take a look at the tilt and rotation. They also look really nice and smooth as well. You don't see any crazy spikes or anything within that graph, which would be a red flag for us. And then also the other thing for us in this case, obviously because of the zoom, we're having a field of view change. And we take a look here at the shots, you can see that there's something interesting that we can do to help us make our track look even more accurate. So we'll go ahead and frame this back again. And you know that here in the first part, there's no zoom here in the beginning of the shot. We haven't begun zooming, we're just doing a tilt and so forth. So if you want, you can feel free to go ahead and select all the points that are before that point and delete those. And so now we're fixed. And the same holds true to the end here, approximately about 191. We're kind of end of the zoom. If you know for sure there's no zoom at that point, you can go ahead and delete those. And it's just a really good way of cleaning up the shot. And because you know, because you're looking at the data, or maybe you were there, you know that there's no change in zoom or field of view going on at the time. And then this will change that you made here will get updated in the camera that you export from SynthEyes. But that's kind of it for this shot. This shot actually has a lot of things you can play with. You can try and put in some objects in the back, maybe explore depth of field in your positioning a little bit in your renders, cast some shadows and some reflections here on the car and so forth. But again, the idea just behind the shot is to have a different type of shot for you to work with and kind of explore some of these different aspects of SynthEyes and getting into actually taking a basic auto track and learning how to correct it so you actually end up with something that ends up being usable for you. So to finish out the class this week, we're going to take a look at doing a still shot. You know, you might get a locked off camera. It might be film, but it's locked off and you're wanting to integrate 3D geometry into, or maybe you just have a plate that you want to do and you want to try and figure out the coordinate system within the scene and figure out the camera within the scene. It's actually really a very useful technique for doing 3D style compositing. And when you don't have multiple frames for the camera tracker program to figure things out, you're out of luck kind of using the algorithms that are built into the software, but you can use a lot of the tools within the software to get this done for you. So we're going to use that add line functionality that we did on the Chicago Michigan Avenue scene. We're going to go ahead and draw a point from here on the corner, a line matching a straight line here. And what we're going to say this is on the z-axis. And again, we drew from one point to another. See the direction the arrow is going. Now, the next thing that we want to do is draw a line here to the left. And what we're going to do with this one is we're going to go ahead and, again, very critical which way we're drawing it. We want to say this one is going to be on the x-axis. And now you can see we've got two arrows defined here. We've got the x and the z, and the intersection of the 2 points, or 2 lines, excuse me, is actually going to be the origin. Now what we can do is go ahead and draw some more points or lines within the scene, find some straight lines and some perpendicular lines and so forth. So let's go ahead and draw from here up here to the beginning of the arch, and this one is going to be parallel to the z-axis, okay, because it's parallel to the original line that we drew. And now the same thing here, we're going to go ahead and draw that, and that line is also parallel to the z-axis. And again, that's going to help things out. And the next thing we're going to do is draw here along the floor, back down to this intersection, and this is going to be parallel to the y-axis. And we'll do that and say the same thing about that, parallel to the y-axis. And now we're going to hit align. And now we've aligned the scene. And so let's go ahead here and switch our view, quad view here. And you can see that now we've got a camera in the scene. Let's go ahead and add an object in the scene. Zoom in here to the origin point. Select this and got the box. And draw it right from the origin. Check it out. It's drawing now from the origin. It's resting on the floor. And it's drawing exactly in the position that we want it to do. So now we've defined our 3D coordinate world space by simply, taking and drawing some lines in the scene, starting with, one axis and defining the origins. So it's actually a really useful technique for integrating elements because, again, as we've kind of hammered in this class, you want to try and reflect the real world coordinates as much as possible within the scenes that you export from SynthEyes, so that when you get that data in a compositing application, you can move things around in a meaningful way. Now, hope you enjoyed this class, and we're going to start really now kicking up the pace of the classes going forward. Victor wants to just make sure that the foundations are laid, but then we'll be coming and really doing some cool, more harder core techniques in the coming weeks. Please drop by the forums if you have any question, and thanks for being a part of FX PhD.